What is up, Coordination? Welcome to the GreenPilled.Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we're building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive sum change to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it and is published every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more, visit our website at GreenPilled.Network, where you can download the GreenPilled book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local GreenPilled.Network chapter. My guest today is Nicole Davis and Kyle Weiss, who have been incubating the PublicGoods.Network with a number of other organizations. What is the PublicGoods.Network? It is a layer 2 built on optimism tech that serves as a shelling point for public goods projects to deploy their contracts. So basically, PublicGoods.Network is a layer 2, but it's also a social and memetic shelling point that public goods projects who care about public goods, can deploy their contracts to and help fund public goods by doing that. So layer 2s gather sequencer fees in exchange for the transactions that are run on them, and PublicGoods.Network is no different in that way. But what is different about it is that those sequencer fees, net of costs, will go to fund public goods. Which public goods? Well, it sounds like they're still figuring out the governance, but Clearfund and Giveth and Gitcoin and a number of others are involved. So I'm interested to see how this coalition evolves and how this becomes a shelling point for digital public goods funding. I think this is also sort of part of the Appchain Thesis, which is a thing that has been developed in the Ethereum ecosystem, where different projects are starting to launch their own chains. So basically, Zora launching Zora Network, Coinbase launching Base, and now Gitcoin launching PublicGoods.Network. But I think that what Gitcoin's doing is a little bit different because it's not just the Gitcoin network. This is the PublicGoods.Network, and they're building a coalition around the work that they're doing. So I think that it's going to be an interesting week on the Green Pill podcast. We just learned about contract secured revenue and how L2s can be used to fund developers on Tuesday. And now PublicGoods.Network is another way that developers, well, at least public goods developers can fund their work. So interesting week on the Green Pill podcast this week. So our guests today are Nicole Davis and Kyle Weiss. Real quick intro on who those people are. Nicole Davis works with early stage organizations to launch and scale, previously with Seed Club and the Open Music Initiative. And Kyle Weiss is a co-founder of Gitcoin, currently the executive director of the Gitcoin Foundation. So I think the combination of our three perspectives on how to fund public goods are really quite fun to get into in this episode. And I think that you're going to enjoy this episode on PublicGoods.Network. Some quick disclaimers before we get into the episode. I am a co-founder of Gitcoin, but since it has become a DAO, I have disaffiliated from leadership there. And that was to make room for other leaders and other ideas, post Owaki ideas, as some people in Gitcoin DAO would say. And I think PublicGoods.Network is an example of that decentralization and that emergent leadership at Gitcoin. So I'm playing host in this episode, but this is a completely independent thing that was developed at Gitcoin without me, and I'm doing this Green Pill episode in order to help them announce it. But otherwise, I'm just sitting in the host chair. So, disclaimer: I co-founded Gitcoin, and because of that, I hold some GTC, the governance token of the Gitcoin network. But otherwise, am just playing host in this episode. So, this is a fun episode if you're into layer 2s, Appchain Thesis, how to fund public goods, or if you're just up to keeping up what goes on at Gitcoin. So without further ado, I give you Kyle and Nicole talking about PublicGoods.Network. Enjoy Coordination.
ValleyDAO is an open global collective working to finance and democratize the governance of synthetic biology technologies to protect the future of our planet. Research and progress into synthetic biology is critically constrained by the world of nation-state regulations and bureaucracy from middlemen. But the potential that synthetic biology has for the world is massive. It can produce a world in total harmony with nature. We can grow stuff using cells like software. It's awesome. And the best part is we no longer have to pull carbon out of the ground to grow and maintain civilization. Don't you think we should be funding this? ValleyDAO does, and that's what they're here to do, to try and make the SolarPunk world of tomorrow a reality today. So join ValleyDAO right now and save the planet at valleydao.bio.
What's up, Kyle? What's up, Nicole?
How's it going?
GM.
So let's pull this thread. What is PublicGoods.Network?
Thank you for asking. Thanks for having us. So the Public Goods Network is an L2 that is being launched by an alliance, a collective, a cohort, an Avengers group of public goods enthusiasts. Gitcoin, as well as ClearFund, Giveth, Public Nouns, many others are coming together to put together this network where the fees, rather than going back to the network and staying there, can be used for sustaining public goods funding beyond just the grant rounds and the other mechanisms that we've currently been using.
Kyle, you want to say more?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us. Love the opportunity to kind of talk about what Public Goods Network. We've been naming it PGN for those of us that are working on it. So you'll probably see us kind of talk about PGN, and PGN's in the logo. Really excited to partner with a number of different folks to make almost like a digital shelling point for public goods projects, and to pull together a lot of the financial sustainability of funding those public good projects. So one of the terms that we heard as we were talking to folks is this is, fees for good. It's really the opportunity to take a lot of the sequencer fees. The vast majority of sequencer fees are going to funding public goods projects, or those that are building public goods specifically. And PGN is an OP stack network that enables opportunity for those that want to fill block space and fund public goods at the same time. So really excited to have the layer 2 live coming up. I think all the testnets are now live. So that's why we're chatting with you, is a fun announcement on testnets here. And there's some event in Paris that some of you all might know about. You can kind of learn a little bit more and perhaps hear a little bit more about mainnet details whenever we are all in Paris. And if you're in Paris, definitely check out Funding the Commons in addition to ECC. Funding the Commons is an awesome sort of regen event that I think we're all excited to participate in as well.
So can you take us through the dates here? It sounds like today on Thursday, the announcement for PublicGoods.Network is, and then there's Funding the Commons Paris, in which you're going to be talking about PublicGoods.Network. Any other dates you can drop on us, mainnet launch, or any other important dates people need to know about?
We won't leak too much of the alpha, but I can tell you that we're excited to move somewhat quickly. The testnets have been live for almost a month now. We've been working with a number of teams to get bridging and infrastructure deployed on all the testnets to make sure that everything is pretty stable. But because it's the same sort of bedrock experience, it's been very easy for folks to port over. At ECC, I think we'll talk about when mainnet will be live, if it's not already live by ECC. So stay tuned for a little bit more of those details.
I'm wondering if y'all can say more about the technology behind PublicGoods.Network. I know that a bunch of the different technology providers, Arbitrum, Optimism, zkSync, Polygon, are all sort of launching their own layer 2 as a service, Appchain as a service kind of thing. And which provider did you all go with, and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have such fantastic partners who want to support public goods with the zkSync team, and with Era, with the Polygon team and Polygon 2.0, the Arbitrum team with the OP team. We've even talked to folks at Gnosis and Scroll and a bunch of others just to figure out what tech was going to be the best. And candidly, the decision came down to less related to the layer 2 or the network itself. We wanted to find one that was sort of proven, and all of those have been battle tested and proven, which is fantastic. A lot of our decision came down to who could help us sort of bootstrap the network from an infrastructure perspective. So we're working with a great team to help run the sequencers and block explorers and transaction viewers and a lot of the infrastructure, to make sure that none of us in this sort of alliance or the adventurers guild here needs to take on ownership of the technology itself. So we tried to outsource as much of the infrastructure as possible, and it's through that process that the OP stack chain kind of emerged as one of the furthest ahead. But I'll mention this here and die on this hill. Gitcoin and I think a number of these other organizations are not L2 maxis yet. Hopefully PGN is perhaps the place that they rally around. We're all funding public goods maxis. And so I think any of the layer twos that are committed to that, we're excited to continue to deploy to just the plurality of layer twos from the Gitcoin perspective. And I think that's the expectation for everyone else in the alliance is there's no plan to be exclusively on PGN, but instead to use PGN perhaps as the default for some of the deployments that we have. So we appreciate the plurality and recognize the importance of sort of scaling Ethereum with multiple rollups here.
I'm wondering if you can say more about what you hope to accomplish by launching Public Goods Network. What does success look like?
Yeah. Nicole, do you want to grab that one? Talk to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab. When I came on, and it's been a pretty short turnaround, it was interesting to kind of think about, the public goods funding models that exist right now. And, there's a couple of big ones in the space. There's also a lot of smaller grants and people experimenting more and more in crypto, which I think is really exciting. But there's not necessarily a place where everybody comes together to do that. And so I think that, first of all, this idea of a digital Schelling point, a center, a magnetic sort of core for public goods is really exciting. And so, like Kyle said, it's not necessarily the only place. We are chain agnostic, but it is a place that you can default to and know that when people come here, on this network, this is a priority. Funding public goods is a priority. And you don't even necessarily need to be, running a grant round yourself or involved in funding public goods. Simply by being on the network, the fees that are being generated are going back toward public goods. And so I think that that's this sort of first piece, is that this becomes a place where there's this gravitational pull around public goods and around something that people are excited to do. And I think that the other piece is kind of this expansion of the public goods meme or the public goods message, that it is, again, something that is perhaps more prominent throughout crypto, where again people are sort of seeing that there's the couple like giants certainly that are coming together to help get this thing off the ground, but that there's a lot more in other spaces. And I think that there's not a lot of cross-industry conversations necessarily happening in what public goods are, how they're funded in a new Web3 world. And so I think that this also offers an opportunity to have discussions and have collaboration cross-industry, which is also really exciting.
Yeah. A couple of quick notes, I guess, just tactically on PGN. PGN is going to settle in ETH. There's no new token for PGN. I won't commit to never being a token. Who knows where this will eventually go, but there's absolutely no plan for a token for PGN. I think we want to make sure that we're still supporting core Ethereum infrastructure in that approach. And I love, Nicole, just the way that you described the emphasis on the digital Schelling point. I think as we've evaluated this, finding durable, legitimate, always on sources for funding public goods is very, very difficult. We kind of talk about this race to the bottom. You have to just get to the core primitives and tax the congestible along the way to make sure that there's opportunity to fund public goods in perpetuity. So the success of PGN really is around the community that we can build, around sort of the adoption that we can grow. And it's much less catered to financial, we want $1 million for funding public goods by this date or time. I think at this point, like Nicole just described, making sure that public goods are top of mind for folks, and that's the thing that they know that they can support simply by running on a network. And as sort of operators, we can continue to grow the number of projects that are building public goods, that are funding public goods, is very much kind of where we're setting our sights for now. So one other quick detail, I think, on the success here, we're going to take a little bit of time to define what sort of governance looks like and how those fees are allocated as well. it's a little bit premature. We don't quite know what that fee structure looks like and how much sequencer fees are going to be earned. And so I think after a few months of mainnet live is whenever we'll come back to all of those in the group that are sort of helping run and operate the network and determine what is that incredibly neutral sort of fee allocation split, which is why we're so excited to have the folks that Nicole mentioned participating early on to help us kind of form that cohort.
It sounds like this is going to be a phased rollout. You've got the testnet launch, you've got the mainnet launch, and then you're going to kind of figure out a governance structure for where fees go. But I'm wondering if you can say exactly what public goods this network is going to fund and how will that be determined? Is there initial thought on the governance structure of where those sequencer fees go and like are they going to Gitcoin rounds? If so, which Gitcoin rounds? And are they going to other DApps like Giveth or CLR fund rounds? And if so, how will that determination be made and how will that evolve over time?
Yeah. I think we know almost as much as what you just described. I think for those that are sort of committing to participation and running on the network, we want to make sure there's upside for them in doing so if they are a public good or a public goods project. And so we're really happy to have Protocol Guild on there to support folks who are kind of building public goods in the Gitcoin ecosystem, HyperCert's team, the Protocol Labs folks are getting involved as well. But then lots of other teams that are focusing on novel funding mechanisms for public goods. So ClearFund, as you mentioned, is fantastic. Love having sort of plurality in QF mechanisms and options available. Definitely the Gitcoin team has been highly supportive of the launch and has made a lot of this possible. But even Griff and Giveth were one of the earliest supporters of just showing their both appreciation, but then encouragement of like, this is amazing, just keep going. Like, yes, that sounds great. How do we participate? So it's always fun to have those cheerleaders, and we always appreciate just the Giveth and community in general sort of showing up to help us in that way. So beyond that, like how those fees are set up, I think it really just kind of depends on how much capital we're talking, how quickly the network grows. But I think one of the things that we're interested in is at least growing the number of sources for public goods funding. Because right now, a lot of us are competing for the same funding whenever we're talking to maybe Optimism or Polygon or Uniswap or ENS or any of these other larger legitimate organizations for you should fund public goods. And it's like, well, great, I gave money to that person, or I gave them to that person, not to you this time. So figuring out ways to kind of grow the pie or raise the tide for all boats is what we hope to accomplish. And I think a lot of the governance will come after the fact of like, is this a tsunami wave of opportunity or is this, a small increase? But we'll know more, I think, in the next handful of months.
So this episode is airing on Thursday, first Thursday of July. And on Tuesday, we had Zach Cole from Canto talking about CSR on the podcast. And for those of us who didn't catch it, CSR is just basically a way of people who deploy smart contracts to a layer 2 can then get sequencer fees for that layer 2. And so contract secured revenue is a way of taking the sequencer fees that would have gone to the network validators and also giving it to the developers that deploy on a layer 2. Is that something that could be in the mix as a way of governing the allocation of sequencer fees?
Yeah, for sure. I think CSR is really, really fascinating primitive in that it sort of empowers the developers to choose, like it empowers those that are deploying apps to decide how to allocate capital. My understanding is there's usually a mix. And so by running on PGN, we might enable CSR such that 75% of net sequencer fees are directed by the developer, but 25% perhaps stay within the network. This really gives folks the power to decide both not only how to allocate sequencer fees to themselves, if they so desire, but to which public goods projects, if they want to do that as well. But I love that type of innovation. Like I said, I think we all kind of recognize that like taxing the congestible, very much a Vitalik term, is where there's opportunity for just sustainability in a lot of the ecosystem. So turning that back to those that are creating the most value, arguably the DApps themselves, the ones that are driving user adoption, the ones that are bringing in liquidity, the ones that are like bringing novel use cases to crypto in general, is fantastic. And so we're very excited to explore what implementing CSR might entail in PGN. And you gotta love the memes and lulls of the EIPs that make it happen. So shout out to all of those that were like making EIP 6969. It's fantastic to have just that concept being brought in and sort of empowering those that are arguably growing the ecosystem as a whole in ways that like the networks don't really grow the ecosystem. The networks enable growth of the ecosystem.
I think that, what I'm hearing a lot of is like, when it comes to how they govern the allocation of the sequencer fees to public goods, it sounds like you don't really know yet, but you're kind of setting the social shelling point in the brand around the PublicGoods.Network. And over the next 6 months, there will be a process through which people can figure out exactly how the sequencer fee governance will work. And it sort of matches my framework for how DAOs can interoperate with each other. Like, you need social interop, and then technology interop, and then economic interop from there. So you're sort of setting the shelling point, and there's a little bit of like trust me in the governance of the allocation of the sequencer fees. Is that like a fair roll up?
Yeah. Yep. I think we're absolutely still at the social layer. Like, technology layer has been selected, but it'll continue to evolve with great innovations like CSR. And governance layer, I think, is the hardest. We just did a podcast on all the different governance mechanisms and challenges with governing things as well. I think we want to make sure that we're not premature in defining something without quite understanding the implications of that. So having a little bit of time under our belt to sort of run and operate and to gather feedback is going to be important.
Yeah. The way I see that, so there's this thing, it comes from the Cosmos ecosystem. It's called the Appchain Thesis, and basically the idea is that every application will have its own blockchain. And I think that that's kind of what we're seeing in the Ethereum ecosystem right now, with Coinbase launching Base, and then Zora launching the Zora network, and now we've got the Public Goods Network by Gitcoin. And what I'm really interested to see is that, like, the Coinbase network is called Base, and the Zora network is called Zora Network, right? But this is not called the Gitcoin network. This is called the PublicGoods.Network. And what's interesting to me in that is that some people might see it as the Gitcoin network, but if you can solve the governance problem of finding a legitimate and not captured way of allocating the sequencer fees to all the different public goods projects, then I think that you create a shelling point where it's not like an app chain. Like, the Appchain Thesis becomes more of like mimetic shelling point chain thesis. Like, you're more than just the Gitcoin network here. And so, I mean, assuming that you solve the governance problem. And so, I'm just interested to see the Appchain Thesis on Ethereum all play out. And I think that, like, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, but what I think that Gitcoin's doing that's interesting here is trying to make it not just Gitcoin, but just trying to make it like the ecosystem of public goods in general. And so just seeing that all play out, I think will be interesting. And for people who are building on public goods, if you can provide a service to them where they bring activity to PublicGoods.Network, and in exchange they get sequencer fees, but without the overhead of having to negotiate setting up their whole app chain, then I think that that's a legit innovation, especially for the smaller builders in the public goods space. So that's how I see the strategic, like, chessboard playing out. I'm curious if anyone has any comments on that, and maybe we'll start with you, Nicole, since I know I've been going back and forth a lot with Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, as I shared, I came on pretty recently, and I'm not, I wasn't formerly with the Gitcoin team myself. And so while I'm a fan and, definitely, supporter and a fan of public goods, like, I mostly what I like to do is convene people and bring people together. And so that piece has been fun for me, of both, seeing who's already in the circle and who's working together and who's been doing, this like really important and hard work already, but then also who else we can bring in. And so I think that, there is a little bit of, I guess, a benefit to my coming in and being able to start driving this forward, because I'm, just thrilled to basically work with everybody and to hear from folks. And I have a little bit of that like advantage of being a bit new to the relationships where I can sort of hear things with fresh ears and approach things in that way. And so, I'm, excited to just build on the enthusiasm and the momentum that's already been happening. But then also, because on the crypto side, I, have spent a lot of time sort of in the like arts and culture and consumer spaces. And there's a lot of also sort of public goods adjacent work happening there. And so I'm also excited to sort of bring in more of those conversations, whether it's, in like the food and beverage or like the back to the land. And, there's a lot of like interesting people doing interesting projects that I think are going to be really excited to know about this. And so I think that's another piece that I just personally love about sort of what we're all building generally, is that these concepts can be applied in a lot of different ways. And so to, bring others into the conversation and to have folks in the room that don't necessarily always, collaborate and build together, I think that there's a lot of benefit to that. So yeah, I think that the way that you described of sort of like right now we're at that trust us layer feels right. And I'm excited to work with folks and to sort of all cooperate in good faith.
I would just want to echo that success is not for this chain to be used as like an app chain for Gitcoin, for this to be Gitcoin's chain. Success really is to grow kind of the cohort and the adventurers that want to explore this with us, and to make sure that this is something that lives hopefully as long as Gitcoin. Like I hope Gitcoin lives in perpetuity as well, but sort of adjacent to it in the fact that, it's funding Gitcoin, it's funding Clearfund, it's funding Giveth, it's funding the next 10 ideas that come up that none of us even know about during the next sort of market cycle. So I am very fortunate in being able to sort of incubate this with Nicole and a number of other great people. But I think, I just really want to stress that as much credible neutrality we can bring to the governance and decision making is one of the things, like kind of the core tenets in which we've been seeding this network, and hope to carry that forward as well.
I'm interested to expand on the question of what is Gitcoin's mimetic North Star, because I know that the mission used to be build and fund digital public goods, and now the mission on Gitcoin.co says fund what matters. So did you all ever consider calling this fundwhatmatters.network? Is the North Star of Gitcoin still public goods, or is it just funding what matters? Or are we splitting hairs here?
No, I think this is actually maybe a valuable nuance. So perhaps I'll give my take, and we're getting a little deep on Gitcoin on this side, but so
you got to admit to start that fundwhatmatters.network, pretty good name, right?
FWT, FWM, not T.
WTF.network. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm shitposting here. If you want to tell us about the nuance, go ahead.
Totally. Well, so much of what Gitcoin is and does, like the soul of our organization, is around funding public goods. But Gitcoin's been in this transition from impact organization to sort of protocol impact organization. And so a lot of what we're focusing on now is enabling people to build, fund, and protect what matters. And in a lot of situations with the new Allo protocol, we're enabling people to allocate capital to things that they care about. And that's not
Allo
always
protocols,
public goods.
Just for the listeners, the Allo protocol is the new protocolized version of Quadratic funding. Is that right?
It is, yeah. So Allo has a mechanism. There's kind of three core components to it. One of which is like a project registry of sorts. The second is the funding mechanism. So Quadratic funding is kind of like the staple, the one that we have built out the most. But we're working on a direct grants funding mechanism. There's Quadratic voting funding mechanisms. There's conviction voting funding mechanisms. There's all sorts of other funding mechanisms we plan on adding. And then the third is the payout strategy. So whether you're doing one-time payout based on the Quadratic funding results, you're doing milestone-based payments, you're doing sort of drip campaigns, like there's a lot of different payout strategies you can select within the Allo protocol as well. So whenever I think about just Gitcoin and where we're headed, I am an allocation capital maxi. I love seeing public goods funded, but I love just seeing entrepreneurs, adventurers, like those who are willing to take a risk on an idea, receive funding as long as they're doing great work for that too. That's what drew me to Gitcoin initially. It's why I loved just sort of the plethora of projects that Gitcoin had, whether that was bounties and hackathons, whether that was grants, all the different ways that we're kind of rewarding builders and building opportunity for those builders. So from Gitcoin's perspective, we have a matching pool that we use to deploy during Quadratic funding rounds to make sure that we're funding public goods. We're really focused on, kind of getting back to the basics with some of our next rounds of core Ethereum infrastructure, open source software, community projects, picking a couple other causes that I think people are interested in. And so PGN is really about making sure that there's kind of vitality in funding those opportunities. But Gitcoin, I think, is being slightly more expansive in our approach and making sure that public goods are not the only thing that we're focused on allocating capital or enabling people to allocate capital towards. Any of the sequencer fees or things that come back to Gitcoin would go into that matching pool, which is earmarked specifically for public goods. But as we've transitioned from just impact organization focused on public goods, funding what matters, I think, is sort of the end game for the protocol side of what we're doing. And Passport is the tool that helps you kind of protect what matters as well. And oftentimes that's your community, and your community might not always be a public good. Your community is a thing that you want to keep intimate. You want to keep sort of highly connected and relational to the people that matter to you as well. So long story short on that nuance, like funding public goods is deep in our ethos and sort of the soul of Gitcoin. But we want to make sure that the technology we're building, the solutions we're building, enables a plurality of funding to things outside of just public goods. And PGN is an opportunity to make sure that for Gitcoin, for a number of these other folks who are going on this adventure with us, there's sustainability in funding public goods, because so much of what Gitcoin is built on is in fact public goods as well. Even the early days of Python being an open source language, and preaching to the choir here as Kevin, having hacked on and built large swaths of some of the early product as well.
Yeah. So the way I let me just say that back to you, and this might be too reductionist, but it feels like public goods is sort of like the soul of Gitcoin. It's where it came from. It's core. It's back to basics. Ethereum, open source rounds, and fund what matters, I think, is just like a more approachable way to wrap things up without having to explain to people what public goods is and from like an economic perspective. And if you're giving communities the ability to allocate capital to what matters to them, to fund what matters, and what matters to them is public goods, then the algorithm will naturally elevate that. So there's a little bit of a TikTok between public goods and funding what matters at Gitcoin, and that nuance is just in the soul is still the same, but it's just a different sort of messaging for different audiences. Did I play that back correctly, or was that too reductionist?
No, I think that's fantastic. We want to make sure that people who are using Allo grant stack, like all the DApps on top of the Allo protocol, can decide how they want to distribute a lot of the funding. We don't want to be ones who say that they can only distribute it to funding public goods. We think there's just so much opportunity in reallocating capital to those who are willing to work for it, those who are willing to build, and those who are doing good things in the space.
What is Allo short for?
Allocation.
Okay, just putting that together.
Yeah. Is that like a TIL today you learned, Kevin? That's
today. Yeah, today thousands of audience members learned it,
nice.
which I think is good.
Yeah.
All right, let's maybe drive it home, since we're getting to the back nine of the episode. So what does a world look like in which PublicGoods.Network is maximally successful?
I mean, I think that, I guess building off of this idea of funding what matters, I think that the ability for people to do that in a place together is really exciting. So it's not just the mechanisms, for example, that allow the funding, but it's also that you can be contributing to something without even necessarily running a grant round or being involved specifically. So I think that first piece of I think we have a lot of we have a lot of examples in the real world of how we fund public goods and how we've sort of experimented with this in sort of like our day-to-day lives. And some of it's, government and tax, some of it's patronage and philanthropy, and different societies sort of play around with that mechanism in different ways. And so I think one of the things that's interesting to me is this sort of tension and conversation between the technology and then the human layer of, okay, well, we have these, new technologies that we're continuing to build with an L2. It enables us to use the sequencer fees in interesting ways. And so what does that look like in this digital world of how do we start to come together digitally, across all of the various boundaries that we have in our real lives, and think about what it means to, do something for somebody that's not yourself. And so I think that, by simply just being on this network, for example, if you're doing something and you need a chain to do it on, by being on this, you're generating fees that then go to someone else that's, not just the network. And, I think there's also just this trust that you're contributing fees to something that somebody, a group of people are working on governing and thinking about where that should go. So I think that that's kind of this first piece, is just that we're continuing to experiment with how public goods are funded, what they are, how we can generate more funds for public goods, and then how we get those out to various places. And so I think that piece, first of all, even the discussion of it, the ability for us to have that conversation is novel. And it's, I think, bringing all of the separate conversations, like Kyle said, or, us all sort of competing for the same dollar. It brings us together in a more aligned way to work on this, to rise the boats, grow the pie, and for people to be involved, even if they're not necessarily, even if they're, building something that's not specifically public goods. And so that piece, I think, is really exciting. And I hope that it will bring sort of the meme of public goods into more people's minds and conversations as well.
Kyle, same question to you. What does a world look like in which PGN is maximally successful?
Man, Nicole gave such a great answer. Let's see. I think I would just echo that we're building community. We're building opportunity for the future of like public goods that we want to see in the world. If we all have to fill block space doing it in a place that aligns with our vision and sort of our ethos of the outcomes we care about is what we hope PGN becomes for so many other people as well. So that's millions of dollars in funding for public goods happening monthly in ways that like credibly neutral can be allocated, and just growing the Ethereum infrastructure and the Ethereum community throughout time. So there you have it. We'll check back in maybe a year and we'll see if we're up to the millions of dollars of public goods funding on a monthly basis.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to having you back and asking the hard questions about what's the credibly neutral governance structure for this and for other public goods funding mechanisms.
Yeah,
cannot wait.
But just know that I'm going to dig deeper on that next time.
Fair, totally fair. Yeah.
What?
Well, I mean, there was this EIP. I mean, you were involved in this early on. Whenever you tried to do this at the core Ethereum layer, right? And that was the piece that I think this got hung up on, was how do you allocate these fees in a credibly neutral way on something like the Ethereum mainnet? I think you shared that EIP with me. What number was that, Kevin? Do you remember?
Oh, it's the EIP we don't talk about, the EIP we don't name.
Okay.
No, I'm just teasing. We're going to do an episode on this soon, but it was EIP 1890, block rewards funding for public goods. And basically this was, I think, 2019, and there was a bunch of feedback from the ecosystem that was like, listen, we love public goods, but there's not a good credibly neutral way to allocate them. And also the layer one needs to be credibly neutral, and we don't want to imbue any set of actors as from the layer one. And so I think that a lot of the activity around finding funding mechanisms for public goods has moved to layer twos, where it's more permission. We're more able to do experimentation without it's kind of like in the United States, and this might be true in America centric of an example, but like the 50 states sort of experiment with things like innovating on healthcare or marijuana legalization, and then if there's a market where if one state is successful, then other markets can adopt it. I kind of think that that's what's happening with layer twos in the Ethereum ecosystem, is that the layer twos are going to innovate on EIP 6969 or maybe public goods funding, and then they're going to cross pollinate with each other if they're successful. But it'll be a market, not something that's imposed top down. But really quick 2-minute tour of block rewards funding and why it didn't work, and we're going to do a whole episode on it soon. But for now, I'm happy to say that layer two is where the innovation is at.
Yeah, cool, sweet. Thanks for teasing that out.
I like your analogy. It's a good analogy.
Which one, the 50 states thing?
Yeah, I mean, sure, U.S. centric, but it's good.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say? Maybe Nicole, we'll go to you first.
Look out for some green circles in your Twitter timeline. If you haven't already seen them, they'll hopefully be taking over. You too can tweet a green circle. I think that that's a piece that's fun and easy. So I think it's a way to start the conversation, proliferate the conversation, and get people interested in what we're building. And then, look for other ways to join. We've got a Telegram group, and we're going to be posting how you can actually build on PGN as well. So tweet the green circle.
The green circle looks suspiciously like a green pill, I've got to say.
Weird.
Yeah, weird.
Green and regen vibes with the green circle.
Well, no, the evolution of the circle is, I think that Optimism was a red circle, and then Base launched a blue circle as their meme. I'm not sure what Zora's color is, but it follows a long lineage of circle emojis for these L2 networks. Sorry, Nicole, did you say something?
Oh, it's their network is the Zorb.
Zorb. Oh, okay. That's right. Oh, they already had a circle. Okay.
Yeah.
These memes are like combining. Right. Same question to you, Kyle. Is there anything I didn't ask you want to say?
I want to give a shout out to ClearFund real quick. They're running a quadratic funding round right now. I think there's about a week left in that whenever this airs. So go to CLR Fund, help fund some public goods. There's great projects on there. I'm excited for us to be able to help fund future ClearFund rounds with this initiative in the future. And yeah, we just echo a lot of the sentiment that Nicole shared. Like, get involved, come join the Telegram, tell us what you love, share it on Twitter. I think spreading awareness, like making sure that folks know that this exists and why it exists, is always step one. And we'll continue to do great things to attract builders to the network, getting things like CSR in place that we're exploring and others. So otherwise, I think that's mostly it.
Okay. All right. 2 more questions. The first one's a hardball. Are you ready? Are public goods good?
Of course. Public goods are good.
Always.
Yes.
It's in the name. All right, let's end on this. How can listeners get involved and support the effort? You want to drop some links that people can go to and just call to action?
Yeah, there's a Telegram group. That's the, I guess, communication shelling point for folks to come together, learn more, meet the others that are building and contributing. So if you want to learn more, the Telegram's probably the best first place. And then we will be continuing to put more and more information up on the site so that technically you understand what's going on and how to build. And again, how to get involved. And then for those that are going to be in Paris, a little thing called ECC, Kyle's going to be there. I think we're going to have a good number of folks there. What can they see and expect there, Kyle?
We love the folks at Protocol Labs and the support that they have given to funding public goods and just Gitcoin as well. A number of us in the ecosystem. So I think at Funding the Commons, we'll share a lot more details on mainnet, both timeline, connection, what's going to be deployed. We know that running on a layer 2 is not one does not simply move to a layer 2. There's usually infrastructure, whether that's the graph indexing, whether that's liquidity, whether that's bridging. There's all sorts of stuff that we're working behind the scenes to get in place to make sure that whenever those things go live, it's a great experience. So we'll have a bunch of details to share at Funding the Commons and during ECC as well.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Nicole. There will be a link to the Telegram and a link to PublicGoods.Network in the show notes. So if you're a listener, click those links if you want to get involved. And Kyle and Nicole, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Peace and love.